She won most talkative in high school, and she has been running her mouth ever since. Welcome to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast with your host, Lisa Fisher.
Okay, I love it when we have a husband and wife team. I can't think of any other, I think one other time we've done this. So you lovebirds are going to recount an incredible story, devotion to one another, but also devotion to fighting for your health, Maggie. Your story's incredible. Your Instagram, your social media is so inspiring. You're so brave. And I'm saying that because in today's day and age, we can't say what our truth anymore. We used to be able to tell what happened to us. And when we do, then the platform, I saw where Reddit shook its finger at you because you were just telling your story. But now you can tell it here on the Lisa Fisher Said podcast. Tell me your story and what's happened since it unfolded.
Wow. So I guess the drama of my story started in 2018. Brad and I had just moved from our home in Los Angeles to Hong Kong, and we were ready for a new adventure. And exactly 1 month after moving, we got that adventure, not what we were looking for, but I was diagnosed with terminal stage 4 non-smokers lung cancer that by the time we caught it had spread to my brain, my eye, and dozens of lymph nodes throughout my neck, chest, and abdomen. The median survival for somebody with lung cancer that spread to the brain is 6 to 8 months with conventional palliative treatments. At the time, very much a fan of allopathic medicine. I wanted to do anything I can just to get this cancer out, help me live longer with Brad. And even though chemotherapy and radiation were never meant to cure me, there was no cure. My cancer was inoperable, incurable, terminal. It was supposed to maybe extend my life for a few months, and I was very grateful for that opportunity. So I did all of the conventional treatments that they offered, a chemotherapy, TKI, and some brain radiation. But I also did my own research. And I'm always grateful for the conventional treatment for buying me a little bit of time to do the research that turned up what I now credit with saving my life, or at least prolonging it this long. And that was the metabolic theory of cancer, which is a published, peer-reviewed, very well-known set of, or theory about how cancer develops, but also the therapies that can help. And these therapies are used either on their own or sometimes better with conventional therapies like chemo and radiation. So I dived in, I got Brad involved and sent him all over Hong Kong looking for some of these foods that I knew were going to cure me or help me improve my outcome. And we slowly started making lifestyle changes that are recommended by this theory. And these are things like a healing diet, fasting, exercise. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is a huge thing with me. So I took up meditation, yoga, completely changed our life. It was 180 degrees. And I learned, I never want to blame anybody for getting their cancer. Nobody deserves this. But I realized a lot of things about my lifestyle and my mindset contributed to this diagnosis for me. And I started working on the mental things to be able to change that, because all I wanted, once I knew how short a time I had on this planet, was to actually live during that time. Because most of my life in the past, I'd just been, waiting for life to get good. Let's, finish the dishes so I can sit on the couch. Right. Let's finish work so I can retire eventually. And then maybe in the future, I'll be happy. And instead I learned I can be happy right now. And that's a lesson that to me has been priceless. It's changed my life, and I am so grateful to cancer for giving me the opportunity to learn it.
So at this time, you had gone through conventional chemotherapy and radiation first. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
So they really happened simultaneously. When I was diagnosed, it was on a Monday in Hong Kong. And at first, the first 4 days, I was like, oh, very sad. I'm going to die. Let me do it well. Make Brad proud of me. My doctor's proud of me. And then Brad took me out of town the first weekend after that diagnosis. And I started reading some books. And I realized that if anybody can survive this, I can survive this. And I started looking
mindset. So mindset
exactly.
Immediately changed. That is so powerful.
It is. And I started my very first fast that weekend. And it was tiny. It was 24 hours. I'd never done anything like it before. Awesome. But I committed myself to let's live as long as I can. So yes, then I did start a TKI, a trypsin kinase inhibitor, which is a type of chemotherapy that's a daily pill. It left me so sick. Poor Brad, just cleaning up after me. My hair is everywhere. My
Oh,
gastrointestinal system
oh,
not optimal. And the biggest thing for me was the brain radiation. I
oh,
had initially two tumors when I was diagnosed, and I got stereotactic radiation, which was a very new technology then. You might hear about it as CyberKnife or Gamma Knife. And I was so sick that
yeah,
first
yeah.
round. I was just
It
vomiting,
kills many,
sweating.
many people. Just the gamma knife will
That's
kill many people.
And so that's what we learned, unfortunately, shortly after I had my second round of Gamma Knife for two different tumors at the same hospital, same technique, everything. But the thing I knew for the second round is the power of fasting and
Yeah.
its ability to help with the side effects of radiation and chemo. So I fasted that second round. And whereas the first round I was sick on the couch for 3 weeks, the second round I walked home from the hospital and I went back to work for the next Monday. I felt so much better. But to your
Unbelievable.
point, Lisa, it did end up causing something called brain radiation necrosis,
Yes.
which has an average survival rate on its own of just 30 months. So I conquered the cancer in its way. I was
Right.
AD after a year, but then I had this brain injury.
Yeah,
But
which didn't actually crop up until
about the
you'd
year
been kind of
after,
cancer free about a year, like a clean scan, I should say. We don't like to say cancer free, but you had a clean scan for about a year, and that's when these issues started popping up with brain radiation
So
necrosis.
the scan could identify the necrosis.
so the interesting thing about brain necrosis is it's completely indistinguishable in an MRI from cancer progression. So my gosh, Lisa,
Oh,
my
wait.
oncologists were
Yeah.
trying so hard to get me to have more radiation in my brain.
Yeah.
But at that time, we understood the dangers of radiation from, your guest, Dr. Thomas
Yes.
Seyfried,
Right.
some others,
Yes.
and Brad and I knew we were not going to do it again. And I knew in my heart, because I had studied, that this was necrosis. So eventually we paid out of pocket for a type of MRI that, well, it won't tell you for certain. It definitely give you a good idea that it's necrosis.
Yeah, better idea.
And since then, the fact that my necrosis lesions are in the exact same place as my tumors, my previously treated tumors were, that they've stayed stable now for 3 years, it's pretty obvious. And even my neuro-oncologist is confident that this is necrosis
Oh,
and
yeah.
not cancer progression.
Yeah.
But really, the only way to know would be a autopsy or a biopsy.
Wow.
And I'm hoping I won't have one of those anytime in the near future.
Yeah. And this is, if you're interested in, if anyone watching is more interested in this is something that Dr. Thomas Seyfried has talked about quite a bit with his glioblastoma
Right.
patients. A lot of times this happens where they get some kind of radiation done and then they have a radiation necrosis, which looks like another tumor. Getting more radiation on top of that is really bad thing to do to your brain if you don't have a tumor that you're specifically targeting. So, we were.
One thing you
Yeah,
also
we got.
you're bringing up here is people forget that the diagnostic tools can also be inflammatory, can also cause other cancers, and people just think, oh, it's just a biopsy. Well, a biopsy takes tissue out, and the needle often then goes back into the mass, and then you just don't know what's happening. What was your decision then? Is it because the brain can't handle a biopsy, or you wanted to pass on it?
For my brain, I think it's pretty evident that it's necrosis. Most
Okay.
doctors, all doctors agree now. And really, ultimately, if there ever was a question, I don't feel like it would affect my treatment. It wouldn't affect
Right.
anything. So there's no reason for me to do that. I am so confident now with how I'm living my life and treating my body. And while death is inevitable for all
That's
of
right.
us, I don't feel any kind of terror or urgency that I felt during my initial diagnosis.
Yeah. For Maggie's specific case, like the way that we actually had an inkling that this might not be more cancer is that it didn't look like her previous scans. Those previous
Got it.
scans where she had a metastasis was like a little tight little ball. This was more like a cloud.
Very diffuse.
And so even though to the doctor looking at the scan, they can't tell, we just had this gut instinct that it just looked different than how it had
Yeah.
presented itself
Yeah.
before.
With the non-smokers' lung cancer, I know that they often treat it with a thoracotomy to remove the mass. Was that an option for you in the beginning?
No, I was actually very lucky that I had a genetic mutation called ROS1 positive
Okay.
that made it possible for me to have this TKI, this type of
Okay.
chemotherapy. The first one that I took had an average progression-free survival of up to 14 months. For me, it lasted about 4 months. However, the second one that I started after that was not approved in Hong Kong. I was able to get it through compassionate use because I was terminal and we're allowed to.
There's no treatments left for you.
Yes, there was nothing else. And that one had an average professional-free survival of 8 months, and I took it for years. And the funny thing is about these medications is there's no reason why you could go off them. Like there's absolutely no protocol until it stops working. And so if you have another treatment that is working for you at the same time that you're taking these medications, doctors will never support you actually going off.
Right.
And so ultimately, Brad and I made a decision together. We know that that is not the cause of my health. And so I reduced my dosage to about half where there were no more side effects and eventually just stopped taking it.
Now, we talk about Western medicine. What approach do practitioners in Hong Kong have? Are they more allopathic with more of a Western model, or do they look at things homeopathically?
The hospital that I went to originally was very Western. In fact, a lot of my doctors here in the States, in Washington State, went to school with my therapists, things like that. However, just being in the environment of Hong Kong and a place where things like traditional Chinese medicine is medicine, we had access to a hospital just around the corner that did acupuncture, that prescribed herbalism. And of course, even when I went there, those doctors were, sorry, stage 4 cancer, the acupuncture is probably not going to help. But what it did help me with was changing that mindset and understanding my body and the relationship between my thoughts and my body. And it really helped me get rid of a lot of my arrogance, where when I was all allopathic, thinking, though, these advances we made in the last 70 years are everything we know about medicine and we've cured it all. And realizing that some of these therapies that have been around for millennia, Ayurveda, TCM, they have a lot of value to offer as well. And I've become shocked by some of these older treatments that do have grounding in science that are just ignored by the Western medicine.
Brad, today I was on social media and I saw where cancer fighter Owen, who's somebody I've interviewed, he said in his post today, he said, I'm going to give you some advice. If you plan to follow the metabolic approach, mitochondrial approach to cancer treatment, don't tell anyone. Don't tell your family because of the pushback you get. So in the beginning, did you think, well, she's just lost her mind? Or were you in the beginning going, you know what, I'm on board?
I was pretty easily on board, I believe. Good. But it was basically like, I was like, I wanted to just make sure that she was making an informed decision.
Yes. Oh, I
right.
agree.
And so that was, I trust my wife enough to know that she wasn't just going to do something kooky just because she was stressed and freaking out. Right. And once that only took a split second for me to just be like, wait, what are we going to do? And it wasn't like she was like, I'm quitting all my drugs. I'm leaving that behind. She was like, no, we're still doing all that stuff. And this is just in addition to that. Right. So yeah, it was actually a pretty easy call. It's like, oh, you just want to change your diet to be healthier? Well, okay. That sounds like a great idea.
Who would argue with that? But I'm hearing people say that they go to their provider. And I've used this example where someone has said, there's the door. If that's your approach, there's the door. And Dr. Seyfried even said recently on Max Lugavere and on Dr. Hyman, he said, people need to consider a hybrid approach. That we're not taking sides. We're combining all of this education, all of this wisdom, and we're putting it together. And that's what you've done. Wouldn't you say that, Maggie?
Absolutely. And you are so correct that there's this arrogance among some Western doctors that, or a hopelessness that you can't be helped, you can't be cured. Just follow the spreadsheets, this flow chart of the available options until you're done and they can wash their hands of you. And I've found, I've had a lot of conflicts with some of my Western doctors now, especially here in the States, where I'll explain, because I listen to what they offer. They have a lot of research and credibility, but I make the decision myself. Right. And so I don't lie to my doctors about what I do, but I tell them what I'm going to do. And sometimes they choose not to agree. But at the same time, they can't explain why I've lived this long, why I'm as functional as I am.
Yeah.
And it frustrates me to no end. And some of the responses I'll get from my primary oncologist are, well, what you're doing now is against my beliefs.
Right.
Or that it's all the placebo effect. And all I can say to that is, who cares?
Right.
Maybe I'm being healed by the placebo effect. Does that make you angry? That it's not your drugs
Goes
doing
back
it
to
you?
mindset. Mindset is everything. And why aren't we teaching people more about the power of the mind? Much less medicinals and herbs and walking on grass and getting sunlight in the day. I mean, we've just taken our patients and institutionalized them to a petri dish of a dropper of medicine and going, that's it. That's your only choice. So I'm so glad you would flex your muscle enough. What is your background? Like, what's your career, or both of you? Because you have to have some chutzpah to be doing what you're doing.
I think I'm very lucky that I was such a difficult person and always believed in myself.
Yes.
And that I had a partner like Brad who believed in me too. So my background was in media, journalism, technology management.
Yes, good.
So I worked as a manager or at the executive level. And so I got used to being able to just push my way around, bulldoze at times. And I felt pretty comfortable in that role, which I know can be not comfortable for others. And that's the reason that Brad and I, all we can say is you have to be your own
Fight
advocate.
for yourself.
Don't try to save your doctor's feelings by dying when he says you're going to.
No. And what about you, Brad? What's your background?
My background is actually in filmmaking. So I was the supervising editor of Jersey Shore. That's kind of my largest credit.
I love
it. I was in reality TV for a long time.
Jim Tan Laundry for the win, man! I hadn't thought about Snooki in years.
He worked on that show too.
Oh, you've just brought me joy for today. You being in the media, your viewpoint is not necessarily embraced because no one makes money off of the mitochondrial metabolic approach. So have you changed your message at all, or are you going to fight back with that too?
The source of our message really is exactly the same as yours, that people can make their own choice. We just have to give them all the information. And it's terrifying to me that there was a study back in 2011 that it takes an average of 17 years for clinical research to become treatments.
Wow.
And so you think about something like Viagra or Prozac that is rushed to market because it's so profitable.
Right.
Something like fasting or changing your diet, exercise, these things have no cute pharmaceutical rep to go talk to a doctor. It doesn't have a marketing team behind it, which is what Brad and I are trying to do.
You are the marketing team. Right. I love it.
Well, yeah. And like a sort of a parallel is they have actually gone through a clinical trial for children's epilepsy to prove that a ketogenic diet, it's a standard of care now for, so whenever anyone is like, oh, the ketogenic diet isn't safe, it's like, well, they give it to kids. So, it's like, yes, they do have supervision and, they're making sure they have all their nutrients and things, but it's not as drastic as a lot of people make it seem. But that still isn't the first line of care, even though it's the least toxic of any of the cares that you could give to a child with epilepsy. So that's sort of, we're following a sort of similar path where it's like, there's a clinical trial right now ongoing for cancer patients with a ketogenic diet, hopefully that we're just kind of keep moving the ball forward.
One doctor I just talked to said, and she's a surgical oncologist, breast cancer surgical oncologist, and Dr. Jen Simmons, and she said what she kind of resented from the medical field where she represents is the urgency. You have cancer. There's the door. You've got to get started right now. You've got to get started tonight. And it's good. She tells her patients, get the information, chew on it a minute, and decide what's best for you. And I've never realized that is the approach. Anybody I see on social media, they'll say, I've got stage 2 breast cancer, which, now there's some controversy whether you need to treat that in it, but whatever. And they'll say, I'm starting tomorrow. I'm getting 30 rounds of radiation. I'm doing 18 weeks of chemotherapy. It's like they just give them the option of, you've got 24 hours to make a decision. And that's not true.
And this is the only decision.
Right?
Yeah.
That's happened to a friend of ours, honestly, who had a very early stage, and she's been through hell for over a year. And to your point, there's a lot of evidence that's piling up that there's a lot fewer, less toxic ways to treat this. And you'll never hear about them from most conventional doctors. And it's not because they don't want to help people, it's that they don't have space to
That's
do it.
right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And back to your point of the urgency, we totally believe that. It's the cancer didn't develop in your body overnight.
Right.
So this idea that you gotta like take it out tomorrow, obviously there might be a few patients that is good advice for, but in a general sense, take a deep breath, think about what you're going to do, the repercussions that the different things you're going to have on your body, and, just make an informed decision. Yeah.
So in 2018, then you started a traditional path. When did the light bulb go off, and who told you about the magic of fasting?
So it really was that first weekend when Brad and I
That
went
first
away.
weekend
So
is
less
when you
than a
did.
week.
Okay.
Started that first fast.
Wow.
And I think the first cancer books that I read was Something Light by Chris Carr, who's still an inspiration, and the Radical Remission book by Dr. Kelly Turner.
Okay.
And that's what introduced me to fasting and really gave me this hope that some people do survive these incredibly terminal, devastating prognoses, and thinking maybe it could be me. Let's give it a chance. And so from there, I just dove into more and more research. That's where I found Dr. Seyfried's papers, a lot of the emerging research in the metabolic therapy. And when we talked about some of the pushback that you might get from using complementary treatments, the one that always drives me crazy was people saying, well, this diet isn't going to cure you. I was like, no, kidding. No diet is going to cure, stage 4 cancer, but it opens up all these other options, the mindset, the empowerment that you get, and it prolongs lives substantially. It improves the efficacy of traditional therapies. It improves your quality of life. Yes. And so when people push back on that, it's like, so what? I should have died after 1 year like my doctor told me to?
Right.
Or is it okay that I've had 5 wonderful years since then?
Yeah.
And if I do die tomorrow, which I don't plan to, I've had a much better life, and I wouldn't deny that to anybody. And it drives me crazy that anyone would deny that choice to an individual to live a better life.
Yeah, that's really the most interesting thing to us, is this pushback for no good reason. Kind of like, okay, so you want to just change the way you eat? Okay, like why do you have to like attack people that want to do this? That doesn't really quite make sense to us. But that there are people that want to do that.
Well, honestly, I think part of it is some people can feel judged. Everyone has a tragic story. Everyone has some relationship to cancer. And I don't think they want to feel like it was within their loved one's control and that loved one wasn't strong enough. And we are never, ever saying that. Most people, I don't think, have access to some of this knowledge, which is why we're bringing it to the public. But at the same time, if somebody chooses not to treat with the metabolic theory or anything complementary, that is their choice also. And I'm so happy to be talking to you because you really do understand that there is this entire spectrum that people can choose from. And they shouldn't feel guilty about that. They shouldn't feel like we're attacking them for not choosing to treat a certain way. Just make it available.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned earlier about how Seyfried and some other people were saying, like, don't tell people if you're going to do this approach. Yeah. And what Maggie was just saying is we've actually, tried to help some friends and family go through this. And they frequently get pushback from their close relatives, right? It's like, it's very difficult for you to make a decision like this if you don't have the support of the people around you. And that was really one of the hardest things. For a little while, Maggie was a cancer coach, and it was just really heartbreaking to have, people that would come to her, whether it was the caregiver or the cancer patient, really committed to this. But then one of the, the other half of that equation was, speaking out pretty, vehemently against it. And it's like, well, then
drink your orange juice.
Yeah, it's tough.
Have some sugar. That's one of the most harmful things, I think, is that narrative of eat whatever you want during your diagnosis, just don't lose weight.
Well,
and that
why is that said? I don't understand that.
Cachexia.
But the thing is, okay, people think it's cachexia. This is the muscle wasting that's associated with most cancer deaths. But there's so much research out there saying that losing fat is not the same as losing muscle.
Right.
A ketogenic diet can actually prevent cachexia. And there's some early research saying that it could reverse it. And so I think it's a lot of doctors who just don't know any better because there is nobody pushing this new information.
And I think doctors are scared of malpractice, quite honestly,
No,
right?
I do
If you
too.
tell your
I do
doctor,
too.
yeah, if you tell your patient to eat less or to eat, fewer calories, right? Like even if they're better calories, that kind of opens the door, I think, to being able to, have a patient come after you
Yes.
later on.
We're a
So,
very
yeah.
litigious society. So I do understand that. And I do want to be protective of the medical field and not lump them all into one group. Um,
Yeah.
Education is one thing. And we know big pharma and big food are the two goalposts that, every TV commercial you see and every medical school we know has to have money to provide the education, and we know who's doing it. So I understand that. Now with the fasting, you first did that 24-hour fast, which I remember my first 24-hour fast. I wanted a gold star by my name and medal. I mean, that's a big deal, but I bet that wasn't the longest one you've done. What's your longest fast?
10 days.
You did do 10 days.
So Brad and I, actually, we're on day 2 right now of our regular weekly fast. Yeah. And we've just become so, I wouldn't say addicted, but really appreciative of the benefits that we get from our weekly fast. We don't eat on Monday. It's water fasting. We have, coffee, tea, and a lot of water, some electrolytes. For the physician prescribed medication,
sparkling water,
and then once a month we'll have 3 to 5 days, which feel great. And then for me, once a year, I like to do a big clear out, 7 to 10 days. But personally, for me, recently, I find that 5 days is optimal for me. I'll refeed and then maybe do another 5 days if I need it. Like every treatment we talk about, it's so profoundly individual.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, people will be able to feel in their own bodies, or until that happens, find some help with a nutritionist or another practitioner who understands these options.
Are you looking at ketones at that point, Brad? Are you checking them?
Yeah, I'm usually pretty fat adapted.
Okay.
So even if I check my ketones, they're almost, especially if we're fasting, my ketones are up and my glucose is down. And I was going to just mention, Lisa, do you follow a ketogenic diet yourself?
I'm more of a meat-based diet with beef, butter, bacon, and eggs. I eat some rice and local fruits in season, and some dairy if I can tolerate it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like if you're on a diet, like probably either one of these, where your glucose levels are pretty level.
Yes.
Then it's much easier to do fast.
For sure.
I think a lot of people, I mean, rightly so. It's like, they're like, I couldn't, not eat for 2 or 3 days. Like we're sitting here talking about like, every week we don't eat on Monday.
Right.
It's like, it's not really even hard for us anymore. And that is because I believe that our glucose levels just are not constantly spiking and dipping and spiking and dipping. And so, even if I don't eat, I still have like a little set of layer of glucose in my system.
Well, that's the magic of gluconeogenesis, isn't it? That the body, because carbohydrates are not an essential macronutrient, but protein and fat are. And so the body, so we're fearfully and wonderfully made, as what the Bible says, the body then takes that and can make glucose for us. So that's a pushback I get, because I am a health coach, from people with fasting. When I get them going down a fasting path, is, well, I have to have carbs, and, no, not really. If you want to enjoy them, that's great. So what in your diet what was your first dietary switch? Because you mentioned diet a lot.
Yes. So, because that was very early on for me, like that first week, after I finished my first fast that Sunday, I determined I wasn't going to put anything into my body that I couldn't find a study on that it was actively healing.
Wow.
And by that, I meant it was going to improve my immune system. It was going to reduce inflammation, or it can actively kill cancer cells in the petri dish. And so it started very small. And luckily I'd started my chemo, my radiation. I couldn't eat much anyway. So I was enforcing a fasting mimicking diet for the first few months as it was. But it was mostly plant-based. A lot of it because I was born and raised vegetarian. Also living in Hong Kong, we didn't have sources of animal meat that we really trusted. Yeah. I'm also one of the very few people for whom animal protein will spike my glucose. It's happened to some people, but not many at all. So we figured out a pattern where I would eat my animal protein in the form of fatty fish or pasture organic eggs on the weekends, right before our big fast on Monday. It reset my GKI, my glucose ketone index. And then we'd resume one meal a day, Tuesday through Thursday. That's mostly salads. and then have 2 meals on the weekends with
living
some
it up,
endless
living on
routine
the edge.
and started it all over.
Right.
Yeah.
And Brad, is that you follow pretty much lock, stock, and
It
barrel
took
what
me a
she's doing?
little bit longer to get, like, it took me like a month or so to kind of get to the actual 1 meal a day, like literally eating exactly what she did.
Yeah.
But eventually we did get there. So
Are
yeah.
you getting enough protein?
Oh, now for
Oh, well,
sure.
now we
Oh.
have, well, kind of like a more snackier meal. I don't know, like a lighter lunch. Now she's talking about when she
Yeah,
was
I
first
see.
diagnosed,
Yeah.
and she was really trying to, after a year of being cancer free, we kind of lightened things up a little bit. I
We
mean,
moved from Hong Kong, and it
yeah,
really the big focus for us now is metabolic flexibility.
Yes.
Because our cancer cells don't have what our healthy cells have, being able to metabolize all these different substrates of food. And so we'll go through periods of carnivore, back to a little bit more plant-based, ancestral eating. The one thing that is important through all of our ways of eating is it's whole foods.
Right.
And no doctor worth his salt is ever going to tell you that you should eat more processed food or you should eat more sugar.
Right.
And so, like so many of these metabolic therapies that we're talking about, they don't hurt if you're going to add them.
Right.
Eating less sugar, eating less processed food, getting a little bit of movement in your life, getting some mindfulness-based stress reduction, whether that's prayer or meditation or yoga. These are things that anybody can add to their treatment. And whether or not you believe they're actually going to improve your outcome, they're definitely going to improve your quality of life.
And this is a perspective we don't hear enough about, that the quality of life for cancer patients that go through a traditional allopathic method, it sucks, y'all. And, we've all watched somebody sitting there with her wig on, staring outside the window, getting ready. And I'm thinking of my mother-in-law. And she didn't die until they gave her that one, it spread to her brain. They gave her that one gamma knife and she was gone. And I remember that's when my husband and I, 20 years ago, that's why I'm a long time on this train. 20 years ago, I said, and I say that I've not walked anybody's path in their shoes, but I said then, I won't do that, because that was the 2 years that she missed her grandchildren, her children, and she suffered. And I hated watching someone suffer. So you've actually, I know you've suffered because it's still very difficult, but you're thriving. And that's what the message I think is so important that the Joneses have. And we're going to talk about the cancer revolution in just a minute, but is that you can thrive during cancer treatment.
And with cancer.
And with cancer.
I'm very lucky that I have no active disease now, but I don't feel like I need that to be healthy or happy. And I know so many women who have survived for decades with their terminal stage 4 diagnoses.
Wow.
And it's when people listen to their doctors about their prognosis. Like, yes, always take your doctor's opinion about treatment, things like that. But when a doctor tells you you're going to die this year, you don't have to do it. And I look at somebody like, your loved person with breast cancer, the person we were talking about earlier with stage 2, who went through these 2 years of hell that don't have to be done. And it does break my heart. And I've had my own story, but I think it's so much more difficult for the people the caregivers who are left behind. It breaks my heart.
And Maggie brought up a point that we frequently make. It's not in our documentary, but just this idea that we don't like to think of Maggie as being cured, or anyone with cancer as being cured. I mean, your chance of remission is so much greater if you've had any, even one type of cancer. And so we really like to, sort of advocate for people to like stay on top of it and still keep that mindset. Obviously, when you've been no evidence of disease for a little while, you might be able to, venture off on as far as your diet a little bit. But
don't go back to the way of life that gave you cancer.
Right.
Don't go back to the fast food and exactly, whatever you did that made you end up where you are. I mean, if you have that choice, obviously some people can't move, but and they live near something that caused their cancer. But if you can, just keep those things out that you eliminated.
Well, the thing she's talking about, you introduce fasting, you change your mindset. Nutrition, anyone can do at a grocery store, but it's just the foods you choose. Nobody has a gun to your head to eat, the junk food but there's an addictive quality, obviously, that people have to get away from. Yeah. Now let's talk about your screenings, imaging, diagnostic tools. What is a part of your monthly or quarterly trip to the doctor?
So, of course, when I started, it was the quarterly PET CT. But after a year, I had no active disease. There would be no metabolic activity in my pets. So here in the U.S., I do a CT scan, and I know this is very. It's up to every individual how they want to scan. I do it twice a year, and we're very lucky in our tiny 700 square foot condo to have a sauna.
Good.
And so I can go through some healing processes to get rid of the heavy metals, things like that. But I do my scanning with awareness. And that, I think, is what's important for people, that they know what they're getting into. I'm also really lucky that I have a cancer tumor marker in my blood test that does track my cancer pretty accurately.
Okay.
So I'll do that, once or twice a month. I'll take that just to reassure myself that I'm on the right track, or if things are going up, to reevaluate my self-care, making sure I'm doing everything that I can. And I mean, that's really it. But ultimately, I can feel in my body if things are good or they're not.
You really
and I couldn't
can.
do this in the beginning.
I believe that.
It took struggles for me. And so I had a point last year where I thought I had a recurrence because I just felt something, and I went and I got my blood test, and yes, my cancer tumor markers were elevated. And so I talked to my oncologist, and I got a CT scan, and yes, they could see something, and eventually I could actually see it in my neck. But I did a 6-day water fast, everything resolved, it was all gone. We never did a biopsy, so we'll never know if it was a real recurrence. But it was first amazing to me that I was able to feel it before everything. And secondly, that it was able to resolve without any intervention.
That is
kind of just like a
so
stressful
impressive.
few weeks.
I can't imagine.
Was like, I think something's wrong. I'm gonna,
But to your point, I didn't have that urgency this time because it's something I'm familiar with, something I've been living with. And I felt very comfortable. Honestly, I don't have any fear of cancer anymore. My big problem is obviously what's going on in my brain with the necrosis. Some of your listeners will hear my voice isn't optimal because of my aphasia. And I'm just so glad I've had this cancer experience to teach me that I can heal. And if I give myself time, I have already improved dramatically in the last year. And it's just the next step in self-healing.
Well, do you need to see a neurologist then for the necrosis, or you just can manage it yourself?
I have a neuro-oncologist.
Oh, okay.
And right here in the States, and he's pretty wonderful. He is constrained by the hospital and what he can do, but he's very supportive. Unlike my primary oncologist, when I tell him how I've chosen to treat, he says, yes, that's not going to hurt you. I can't prescribe that for you or support it in any way, but I got it. And, some of these treatments, like we came to the U.S. to try hyperbaric oxygen therapy. My oncologists were angrily opposed to it, saying absolutely does not work anything. When my cancer or my necrosis progression stopped, they eventually put in my chart that they think it's because of the hyperbaric oxygen.
That's a victory. That's a victory.
And I think that it's actually an approved treatment for necrosis.
Is it really?
So it was just this particular oncologist that was opposed to, very opposed to it, but it's not it's a treatment for necrosis.
At least in some countries, it's just all crazy.
No, in the U.S., I believe.
Now, and it's just why you have to be your own advocate.
You absolutely do. Is hyperbaric oxygen then kind of a prophylactic for a cancer, or is red light sauna therapy or any of those things something that everyone you would recommend everyone does every day? Or when they can?
And you know me, I'm so individual.
Right.
During my cancer journey, that first year when I actually did have detectable disease, I never had an opportunity to try some of those things. I never tried vitamin C or mistletoe. We did have a sauna in the building that we used until COVID, and love that, which is why we have it here. And I never tried high pressure hyperbaric therapy because it wasn't available in Hong Kong.
Okay.
We actually ended up moving to London specifically for that reason in 2020, the weekend before shutdown of COVID. So I could never use it there. Yeah. And it wasn't until, when was it? It was the end of 2020 that I had my first seizure. And that's when we realized that I had to do something about this necrosis. And that's when we found a cheap used HBOT chamber in the US, and we ended up moving here.
Yeah, it's really interesting that we were actually trying to do, I was finishing an MBA, a late in life MBA. So that's why we ended up going to London. And she was like, I'm going to do hyperbaric while we're there. And then just a few, months later, she had this just big seizure. And it's like, I really wonder if she would have been able to get the hyperbaric while we were in London, because we were there for about 6 months while we were finishing this MBA. If it would have actually what could have happened? It's like,
See, that's another
Yeah.
thing that makes me resent COVID, in that people who are pursuing their good health and their treatments, that was also, they put a lid on that.
yeah. No, I
Pretty
mean,
heartbreaking.
there was a lot of stories about people that were just trying to, like, having heart attacks and like not going into the hospital, right?
In
like
our
just,
building,
yeah.
having their chemo delivered to them so they could do the infusion themselves without supervision. It's
Oh
terrible.
my gosh.
But better than missing, I guess, a therapy that you feel in your heart that you think you need.
Yeah.
Just the power of placebo and that mindset
Yeah,
was
that's true.
really affected.
Now, do you continue mistletoe therapy or the vitamin C or
I've
anything?
never
Oh, you
tried
never
any
did
of
at all.
those, but
Okay.
I love having it in my back pocket
Yeah.
if I do
If-
have
if
a
you need it.
recurrence that needs
Yeah.
something more.
Yeah.
And I've read so many different healing modalities that I love knowing about. We have a summit in September where we're getting together some of these great people who have written books about, mistletoe, vitamin C, all of that. Something new called photodynamic therapy. Like there are so many less invasive treatments coming out, and we just want to bring them to people so that they can see that whole palette and decide what resonates with them, what's going to work for them.
And we know several people that have used mistletoe to great success and are speak really highly of it. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, now let's talk about how you've combined your career with this message, which I think is, I know part of you's thinking, God, is this why you chose me so I could tell the story? I don't know, and I'm not here to make an existential statement, but I'm so glad you're combining your knowledge with your skill set. Brad, tell us about the film series. Let's talk about the summit. Let's dig deep into what you're doing.
Yeah. So, Maggie found these, metabolic therapies, this metabolic theory of cancer. And not that there aren't books out there, but
Right.
there's not a lot of people that are gonna, especially when they have cancer or when they're, the caregiver, are just gonna be like, I'm gonna go on Amazon and buy like a half a dozen books and just,
Right.
like plow through these things. A lot of people don't have that time, and some of the knowledge can be a little, let's just say, sciencey, right? It can be difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, we need to get this message across in a way that's just simpler and easier so that people can just digest it and not have to, like be bombarded with not be like a chemical engineer to like understand this stuff. Right. And so we approached Travis Christofferson, who wrote the great book, Tripping Over the Truth. We were like, hey, do you think you'd be open to doing an interview? And if so, we think we could make a documentary about this. And luckily, he was very receptive to the idea. He reached out to Thomas Seyfried for us and put us in touch with him. Tom said yes right away. Wow. And kind of once we had the two of them on board, several other people, signed up, said yes when we approached them. So it ended up being fantastic. And yeah. And what would you add?
And so we moved to the States at the end of 2020, and I was like, Brad, what are we going to do here? And he said, it's time to make this documentary.
Wow.
And at the time, we thought it was going to be a, 90-minute documentary, one and done in a year. And it's since turned into this docuseries because we have collected so much information from these incredible scientists and practitioners. And we took it to a focus group in 2021 to show them the raw footage we collected. And they all agreed that this had to be a series.
Absolutely.
You couldn't cut anything out. And so episode 1 is now in festivals.
In fact, they wanted us to add more.
Yeah. season two. But episode 1 is in festivals right now. And the feedback has been incredible from a production standpoint. Brad is incredibly talented as a filmmaker. And I think on IMDb, we have 74 awards right now.
Unbelievable.
And going to festivals. But as you say, there is still a little bit of pushback from a community that isn't ready to accept some of this information, which is why... what we're talking about is just so for sure. I mean, it's evidence-based, it's published, peer-reviewed. It's not us talking. It's not about my story. It's about these scientists talking about their research. And it's pretty fun.
And I was going to say that we sort of, as you might guess, we've had, a great reception from within this metabolic community. But the greatest thing to me is people that just don't even have a dog in the cancer fight, right? There are people that just randomly see this movie as part of a film festival. And they have reached out to us and, or comment on social media, just how much they liked the movie. And that's, all the awards that we've won, those aren't like, cancer or metabolic awards, right? These are just film festivals
story.
that are out there, right? It's just like, like a good film. So we're just, it's just good. It just feels good to know that the word is out there and it's resonating with just everyday people. So maybe there's actually even like a little bit of prevention going on. That's what
good.
That would be great.
Good. So
in addition to the festivals,
how many episodes?
we've been going to some.
Well, how many episodes
There's
do you
one
have?
that's done now.
Okay.
One done now. There will be 4 plus a bonus episode. We haven't decided yet whether the bonus is the beginning of season 2 or the end of season 1. But you can read all the details at cancerrevolution.film and some of the incredible casts that we have involved. And because not everybody can make it to a festival or to one of our conferences, we're doing an online world premiere streaming. So you can watch it from your home. Not just episode 1, but a lot of bonus footage, and we can't guarantee, hopefully episode 2 in September. And people can sign up for a donation of any amount to stream that at their home. And it should be great. And it's also tax deductible because we are a nonprofit.
You are a
charity.
501c3. Okay. I will definitely donate. And you'll tell me the link now, and I will put this in the show notes.
So actually the link where you can do everything, whether it's just signing up for the streaming world premiere or also the summit, is cancerrevolution.events.
Okay.
But there's a link to that from cancerrevolution.film too. And for the summit, we're doing it at the same time as the world premiere. And for the series, we're doing very evergreen information on the why of metabolic therapy. Why does it work?
Okay.
How come you haven't heard about it from your doctor so far?
Yeah.
Right.
But not so much on the individual treatments. And that's why we're holding the summit, to bring together just the very latest cutting edge research spoken by the practitioners themselves. And we have over 36 amazing people contributing right now. And the information on that is at the same URL, cancerrevolution.events.
Okay. Just because I'm a journalist and I'm spelling, am I saying cancer evolution when I type it out, or cancer and then revolution?
Such a good
One
question.
R.
1 R. Okay. Cancer evolution. Okay. All right.
It's a play on words, but yeah,
I got it.
It can be a pain.
Yeah,
I'm very
it's
visual.
Cancer Revolution 1R.
So I wanted to make sure that we're not, because we're saying really it's a revolution, but it's also the evolution of cancer.
Is,
so
yeah.
I totally see where you're going with that. I just want to make sure we get all that information correct.
Kind of like right here behind us.
Yeah.
For people who are viewing.
Yeah, people who can see it.
Yeah, if anyone's looking.
Yes, on my YouTube channel, you can see this. And it says the newest hope for cancer is one of the oldest. Isn't that, that's fabulous. It is. It's one of the oldest treatments or hopes.
Yeah. When you start looking into this, the basically, before we discovered the structure of DNA, this metabolic theory of cancer was neck and neck with the, chromosomes being the cause of cancer. But once we realized what the structure of DNA was, and that was, DNA encoded for everything, this metabolic theory of cancer, that your mitochondria become damaged and then, send a signal to your nucleus to do something about it, that just got left behind. And there's political reasons, historical reasons, but there's no conspiracy theory about it. It's just the way that people work, right? It's really easy to see scientists gravitated towards DNA, and this theory just kind of got left behind.
And the tragedy of that is taking away people's empowerment
Right.
of telling you it's all in your genes. You're one of the unlucky ones. There's nothing you can do. And it breaks my heart. And again, not to blame anyone for their cancer because of the society that we live in, but you do have at your agency, you can do things that will improve your outcome. And that's what we want to tell people.
In underdeveloped countries or third world countries, and somebody has cancer and they don't have the diagnostic tools and they don't have big pharma chasing them, it makes me wonder, do they just beat it because they're out in the savannah and they're killing their animals and they're fasting because that's how they eat, and then they're eating the local fresh fruits and vegetables and they get over it?
Those people don't get cancer in the first place, Lisa.
And well, they didn't used to, but now we have all these food products going into those regions that never did have cancer
that's
before.
true.
And the standard American diet, the Western diet, it just breaks my heart.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And
but we did actually, it's what you mentioned. It reminds me of we spoke with Dr. Walter Longo for the documentary, and he's a fasting. That's his main area of expertise. And he is like, hey, this is really, some of his studies are really showing how much efficacy fasting can have towards cancer. And he's like, yeah, our goal is to basically be able to push this out to somebody who can't afford, a really expensive cancer drug, but this could still have
because this is free,
an amazing effect.
Yeah, fasting is free.
So yeah.
And doesn't Dr. Seyfried say that a 7-day fast reduces your cancer load by like 95%? It's some statistic. I think Ben Azadi shared that recently on his social media. He's the keto camp guy and big, proponent of intermittent fasting. Dr. Mindy Pelz, a lot of these people that I follow, and it was impressive that what a 7-day fast. It's like taking the wash rag and wringing it out and just starting over. And that's what you
all
do.
Those old cells,
and that's what we know about the magic of autophagy. Obviously, that was, discovered in 2016 by the Japanese researcher. But again, our ancestors did it for generations. We didn't, Dr. Fung, that's part of his story, is that until we started this constant feeding and we had to eat breakfast, lunch, and day and snacks. And then, that was adopted obviously by hospitals because thyroid and diabetic patients, I'm a thyroid patient, but our endocrinologist, diabetic educator would talk to thyroid patients and tell us to eat 5 times a day and eat 2 snacks. I mean, I just go, really?
And then this whole society builds up around it where you do start to feel guilt, like you're accusing someone of being unhealthy if you're eating healthy for yourself. And I am just so fortunate that we were in Hong Kong, away from most of our social circle at the time. Yeah. So I could flatly decline any kind of food that wasn't healing.
True.
I mean,
it was actually, we both, I in particular put on weight when we came back to the States, and there were more options for healthy food. It was easier to find organic food, grass-fed meat, nuts, right? When we were in Hong Kong, it was hard to find the good stuff. And so we were just like out of necessity sort of on this diet. And I put on like 10 pounds when we came back to the US.
And for people who are going to work and they're having to cook for their families and still socialize and things like that, it's hard. And I understand it's hard, but it's still possible. And I consider my healing way of eating part of my cancer treatment. And so I treated it that way in Hong Kong. And if somebody came to me at Chinese New Year offering me mooncakes, very unacceptable to say no, but I would just say, as part of my cancer treatment, I can't eat this. And anyone I realized at that point who was still trying to pressure me to eat in a conventional Western way, they didn't have my best interest at heart. And so there was no reason to have to change my healing to accommodate their feelings.
Yeah.
That is such a sign of maturity. You are so grown up.
You don't. Yes, I told you that.
Thanks for listening to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe and download all the episodes and leave a review, won't you? The Lisa Fisher Said podcast is produced by ClantonCreative.com.